Right, well, what a fantastic day we've had. It's actually been tremendous to be here, and thank you so much to Chairman Mundine and to Director Cooper for the invitation for one of us from the Wild West to come over and just to provide a report to you on what's been happening on the Western Front. Now, I begin, friends, in the customary way, and want to particularly acknowledge the few Western Australians that are here in the room. And in particular, I note that I've got one of my colleagues, the Honourable Phil Twiss, who's a new Member of Parliament who's here, so I acknowledge him. And also my friend, the Honourable Phil Scott, who's also a new Member of Parliament. One from the Liberal Party and one from One Nation, and here we are together uniting for this important Conservative cause. Now, friends, when I was given the opportunity to come and accept this invitation to be here, I decided very quickly that the subject of today's presentation would be on freedom of association. You see, I think many of you here would know the Honourable John Anderson, who I think is perhaps our foremost modern thinker in Australia. And if you've been following some of John's work in recent times, or indeed for many years, you'll know that he often talks about four fundamental freedoms: freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of association, and the freedom to own and to trade property. Today I want to talk about freedom of association because it seems to me to be one of those freedoms that we don't talk about too often, and I had made that decision some time ago. Now, as it so happens, a week ago, I was in the WA Parliament waiting to attend an event that had been organised by two of my parliamentary colleagues, a Western Australian senator and also a new member in the Western Australian Upper House. They had organised this event. 500 people had agreed to attend this event. There were two guest speakers. I was the first, I was the entree, and then we had the main course from Senator Jacinta Naparjimba-Price. And now it all happened in that week that you know about. And what was quite extraordinary in the West Australian Parliament is that the Premier, the Deputy Premier, some of his senior ministers spent the entire question time calling for me not to attend the event with Jacinta and for the event to be cancelled. And once again, the irony of the whole thing was that they had no idea that I'd intended to speak well before any of those so-called controversial events on freedom of association. Now, friends, it just goes to show in a very real way that freedom of association not only is something that we need to be speaking about and to defend, but it also just goes to show that our political opponents are constantly attacking that very fundamental freedom. And in the few moments that I have with you this afternoon, I want to give you a report from the West on how freedom of association is not only under attack, but it is in fact being abused. And I'm going to give you two quick examples from the West Australian Parliament, or as Gary might refer to it, the West Australian Province. I'll get to that perhaps a little bit later, this idea that we don't want to be engaging in the provinces. But nevertheless, from the West Australian Province, I'll give you two quick examples. We've got a piece of legislation in Western Australia. You might refer to it as the anti-consorting laws. Now remember, freedom of association enables us to do exactly what we've been doing all of today, to freely, voluntarily gather together for a common cause. And in Western Australia, we have these anti-association laws. You see, if you are an individual who has been convicted of serious criminal offences under Western Australian law, you can be handed a consorting notice and be told that you're not able to consort, in other words, associate or assemble with other named individuals who have also committed serious criminal offences. Now you see, this goes to demonstrate that no matter where you are on the political spectrum, we recognise that freedom of association, like many of the other freedoms, are not absolute. and that sometimes things like public safety have a higher threshold that needs to be taken into account. And so we can have these consorting notices issued to individuals who have already demonstrated that they have no regard for the rule of law. Now, very interestingly, in Western Australia, in this anti-consorting law that passed some years ago, only in the last 4 years, the WA Labor government snuck into the back of this legislation a special defence. And the special defence allows an individual, now remember which individuals we're talking about here. We're talking about individuals who have committed serious criminal offences. They've been given a consorting notice and police have said you're not to consort with these other individuals who have also committed these serious criminal offences. Sex offenders, drug traffickers and the like. Well, this special defence allows an individual to say, well, no, we were consorting for union business. Now, friends, can I put to you this afternoon that this is a gross example of the abuse of the principle of freedom of association. That's not what we're talking about when we're talking about defending this fundamental right to freely gather and associate. There's no problem with people wanting to form unions and gather together voluntarily. We can have a discussion about how they do that on another day. They're entitled to do that. But if you have lost that right because you're a serious sex offender and you're a serious drug trafficker, then it applies in all circumstances, not because you can come along and then suddenly say, well, actually, we were consorting together for union activities. That makes a mockery of the rule of law. That's what's happening in Western Australia at this very moment in time. Now, to contrast that, friends, the example that I give you, while Labor is busy abusing that principle of freedom of association, they're also attacking this fundamental principle. And they're attacking it for law-abiding Western Australians. They are insisting, they have said that they intend to bring in legislation in Western Australia to remove Section 73 of the Equal Opportunity Act. What's Section 73 in Western Australia? It's a special provision that allows faith-based schools, which consist of parents voluntarily, freely gathering together for what common purpose? To educate children consistent with their convictions and ethos. This particular provision, Section 73, entitles them to do that. The government want to remove this particular provision so that they can dictate to schools who they can and can't hire. This is an attack on that freedom of association, that very principle. So on the one hand, we have the WA Labor government saying that anti-consorting laws can be circumvented so long as you're undertaking union business. But if you're a law-abiding family, if you're a law-abiding parent, and you choose to send your child to a faith-based school, you don't have to if you might want to do that, the government says, well, we're going to remove that exemption so that we're going to say to you that we'll tell you who you have to employ. You don't get to choose that. This is a demonstrated example of how freedom of associations laws are being abused in Western Australia and being attacked. I share those two examples with you, friends, today at this national conference because the provinces, might I say, matter, because that's where these laws are being made. So I absolutely share the view of one of the previous speakers who said, get involved, and let's make sure that we get involved for the sake of our nation, and in particular our federal parliament. But can I put it to you this afternoon, as we're concluding this tremendous day, that we also give some consideration to these provinces in our federation and in the states, and that you look to participate at every level of government, not just at the national level, but at the state level, and might you be so inclined at the local government level. And friends, as we conclude today's sessions, my message to you from the West is this. A couple of years ago, Chairman Mundine and Director Cooper, they asked me to come here and we talked about the Aboriginal cultural heritage laws that had been rammed through the Western Australian Parliament, so shambolic and so grievous was that impingement on private property rights that despite the fact that the WA government had total control of both houses, that those laws ultimately were repealed. And at that time, my call to those who attended that conference in Sydney was that we need to make sure that we are participating in our modern democracy, and when we participate, we need to do so on the basis of articulated principle, and then we need to do so in a persevering fashion. And friends, nothing has changed in that respect. I would ask you to participate at every level of government. As people have said to you throughout the course of today, join the political party that best sums up your values. It was extremely well articulated by former Prime Minister Abbott earlier this morning. But there would be two other things that I'd ask for you to consider as we're wrapping up this afternoon, friends. Because you have heard that message about the need to join a political party quite a few times today. But in addition, as a Member of Parliament, it's now 17 years that I've had the privilege to serve in the West Australian Parliament, I asked myself what would be something that would be really good to hear from a group of Conservatives. And I think the thing that would be really good is if in your state, in your province, I'm going to use that word a few more times, I think, this notion of a province, in your state, identify the Member of Parliament that best represents your values and get in contact with that Member of Parliament and ask them this simple question: what is it that I could do to help you? As a member, that would be an incredible support to have somebody contact the office and say, what is it that I could do to help you? And I have every confidence that that person will then be able to direct you in the right direction. So the first call to action from me, from the West, friends, is not only for you to continue your participation in our Conservative cause, but secondly, to identify that Member of Parliament and contact them, and to do so this week. And my last call to action to you this afternoon, friends, is that we often talk about this notion of values and the importance of the individual and the family unit. My request to you this afternoon, and thank you so much for your attendance today. It's actually been a total joy and privilege to be here with all of you throughout the course of today. My request to you is give some consideration to your own family this evening. What is it that we can each do with respect to our family at home? You see, we talk about wanting to change the culture. Well, surely changing the culture starts at the home. And so if each of us now redouble our efforts at home and indeed are looking beside us to the neighbour, the family, the cousin, the person in need and helping them, that's how we change the culture, ladies and gentlemen. And that's my message to you from Western Australia. Thank you so much for your attention this afternoon.